Hi, I'm Dr. Patti Giebink. I'm a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist. I have been practicing in South Dakota, delivering babies, providing women's health care. In this building, this used to be a private abortion clinic for many years. And when that doctor wanted to retire, he sold the building to Planned Parenthood, who then hired me to work for them doing abortions. At that time, to come in the door, you had to be buzzed in. And as soon as the women would come in, they would be checked in at the front desk. And they would pay their money before they got past the gate. So after they did the paperwork, then they would get some laboratory studies done, a pregnancy test, and then they would give their urine specimen for the pregnancy test, and then they would be taken back to the ultrasound room. And at that time, they weren't asked if they wanted to see the ultrasound. But they did get an ultrasound, and then they would go back to the waiting room to wait until they would be taken to my room. And so I would meet the woman in the exam room, and I would have a short period of time to talk about the procedure, ask her if she had any questions, and usually one of the things that I always knew I had to explain was that when I turned on the suction machine, it was so loud that we couldn't carry on a conversation. I would dilate the cervix according to the number of weeks, and I would choose the cannula that I was going to use, and I would attach the cannula to the hose going to the suction machine, and I would slide that into the dilated cervix, and then we'd turn the machine on, and I would go around suctioning out of the uterus. And then I would take what's called a sharp curette, which looks a little bit like a spoon, and I'd slide that in the cervix and just make sure that the tissue is all removed, and then I'd make one more pass with the suction machine. And generally that was a very quick procedure. Then once we turned off the machine and I took the instruments out, the patient would then slide back up and sit up. Meanwhile, I would be at the sink making sure that the uterus was completely evacuated, that I had the amount of tissue that I would expect for that gestational age. By the time we get to 3 months, you can see that the baby is well developed. You can see the size of the head, and you can imagine how this would not go through a cannula, which is a plastic straw. And the further along, the more weeks of the pregnancy, the larger the cannula would be, up to a certain point. And when we talk about the risk of abortion and how following the abortion that the woman is at risk for preterm delivery, and you can see that for this head to fit through a cannula, that the cervix has to be dilated to the point where you can fit a cannula through it. The largest cannula that we would have here, I believe, was a size 12. And so you can also see that the hands and the feet are going to come through okay, but sometimes the head, which is also known as the calivarium, would not come out through the suction cannula. And I would have to use a forceps or a tool to grasp the head to pull it out. And so you see the necessity of actually lining up the body parts and making sure that there's 2 hands, 2 feet, the head, the torso, because if I'm missing body parts, then I have to go back and repeat the procedure. And that didn't happen very often. It was a very rare instance where I had to go back to retrieve more body parts. People had asked me, how did we dispose of the babies, the body parts, the tissue? And so I would usually rinse everything under the water and end up with just parts. And then there would be a big container under here that had a red medical waste bag, and all the tissue would go into this container with the medical waste bag. Nothing but liquid was down the sink. Once the patient was done with the procedure, was done with the abortion, then the patient was taken to the recovery room. And one of the reasons that I'm doing this video is that in South Dakota, I'm uniquely qualified to really speak to this issue because I'm a board-certified OBGYN and I have done abortions. I have performed abortion procedures. Now in South Dakota, the elective abortions have to be in the first trimester. But when I was training, we did second trimester abortions. We've learned that abortion hurts women, that women are more likely to have a preterm delivery following an elective abortion. They're more likely to have depression and suicide. There are serious risks of having elective abortions. Some women never get over it. Women develop problems having gone through this elective procedure. And I think in a woman's heart, she knows that that's a unique human being. That's not just a piece of tissue. And I was guilty of adding to that concept because that's what I explained. I said, it's just a piece of tissue. I could not allow myself to think of that as a unique human being, as a life. Because obviously the next train of thought was, I'm killing a life. I can't deny that I did the procedures here. I was the main abortion provider during those years. And it's my desire to end abortion on demand in South Dakota. And I know that this is the time, this is the year. Initiative 11 is the law that we need to pass.